Hello and welcome to Just Keep Writing,
a podcast for writers
by writers
to keep you writing.
I'm Marshall.
I'm Nick.
I'm Brent.
And I'm Will.
And we're back again with Brent to talk about Unnecessary Chaos, but this time with magic. Nick, lead us through the conversation about magic that we're going to have with Brent. Go for it, buddy.
Look, I'm just going to throw it out there. You can't talk about magic systems and just limit Brent and his experience and expertise to just one novella. So tonight we're going to start. Well, I want to know how you build a magic system, and then we're going to whittle that down into what decisions and how you built the magic system in Unnecessary Chaos. So almost a little two-parter here. Here we go. Describe writing this magic system in 3 words.
Okay, 3 words building a magic system. Thematic would be the first word. Second word I would say is enjoyable. And the last word would be expansive. Yes. Okay. There we go. All right. So thematic. I tend to prefer fantasy stories where the magic is saying something about the world and the story that it's being told, and kind of reflective of like that world in some way. So like for instance, you have I'll bring up an example that's not mine. Final Fantasy VII. You have the Shinra Corporation. They're digging for materia, and it's a magic system built on resource exploitation. And you see it in how there's pollution and corporate excess and so on and so forth. So it's saying something about the world. Or you have something like the One Ring in Lord of the Rings. How thematically it's saying something about power and possession and what happens when you try to control everything and want everything, and what that does to a person. And I would say in Necessary Chaos, I think thematically I was going for trying to create magic that showed that showed all the worst parts of a capitalist society, or overtly like oligarchical world in a way. So that's thematic. Enjoyable is more personal. Like, I don't want to read about magic that I'm not, or I don't want to write about magic that I don't actually think is cool, or that I'm not having fun with, or I want the magic to feel like I just want to have a great time with it, because I'm a comic book guy at heart, and one of the things I always hated was like when the character would have this lame power, and I'm just like, this sucks. I don't want to read about this guy that can like create ice cream out of like nowhere, which actually could be a fun story maybe, but yeah. So expansive. So expansive for me is ties into how I am as a world builder. I always am thinking about all these things that exist outside of the actual story, all these places and peoples and cultures and whatnot. Because I always like my worlds to feel like there's 1,000 other things going on, and that includes like. And so I try to think about that when I build the magic system too. It's like, even if it's just one particular type of magic, well, how does this magic look in another culture? Or how does it operate in a society with a different biome, or so on and so forth, things like that. So that's the 3 ways I kind of approach building it in my own work.
So when it comes to, like, you hit on a couple different things that I kind of want to jump back into, the enjoyable aspect. Talk to me about when it comes to Unnecessary Chaos. Like, what was the best part about building that magic system?
I think the best part about it for me was not even so much the fight scenes and all that. It was more so thinking about what the long-term consequences of using these powers were, because thematically I was trying to talk about excess, right? So I really wanted to kind of explore, like, okay, these people have these powers. Well, these powers they come with consequences, right? They come with it kind of like anyone who ultimately serves as like a tool of empire, like they end up getting crushed by it in some way, shape, or form. So that was kind of like the most fun part to think about, like, oh, well, if they use this two voice too long, they're gonna not be able to talk at all. Or, oh, if they, they create these diseases and they'll end up killing them in the long run. Whatever. I just wanted to kind of like, it was kind of fun thinking about the long term consequences, because it added a bit of at least for me, it kind of like helped me shape the characters a little bit too, because what kind of people are willing to continue to use these powers knowing what it could do to them in the long run.
Well, and it's interesting. I have further questions on consequences of your magic system here that I'll dive into. But you talk about two voice and things like that. I gotta know, like, what's the inspiration around that one?
It is just basically magical code switching. Always like I wanted to kind of like create something like where like, I don't know, I was thinking about, because it was spies, right? And I was like, okay, well, what kind of like magic would be really cool for a spy to have? And I'm like, oh, well, if they could kill you while just talking, having a casual conversation with you, like that'd be kind of hard to detect, that if you don't even understand, like you don't even know that the words they're saying are actually like words that can harm you. Like I was like, okay, that's kind of cool. So I kind of like wanted to build on that, and then yeah, and then like I said, thematically it just kind of like was like code switching made manifest in a way. So you have these two gay black men that they can talk in a language that they can understand, but a lot of other people can't. So yeah, I just thought that was interesting.
And now, going based off our previous episode that we had with you last time, riding through the hard times, how much of this magic system was developed because of the hard times that you had to ride through?
So I would say that was actually the magic was probably one of the few things that like remained fun for me throughout the entire process. Like that was something that actually wasn't really gut wrenching at all. Like the magic actually was probably one of the parts that like stayed fun, stayed like not, I wouldn't say easy, but easier to write through than anything else was like getting the magic right. So yeah, if anything, it was probably a grounding force in the writing, because it wasn't hard, it was fun. So yeah, so I don't think that was really tripping me up too much.
Now, one of the other words that you mentioned was expansive.
Yeah.
Obviously, like, you've got an affinity for building magic systems. We've all seen it. You have a really, really good background when it comes to comic and fan fiction and things like that. So talk about the expansiveness of this magic system. Like, how did you have to whittle it down? Did you have to like pick and choose what you had to eat? You smile, but I know the answer. Just tell everybody else.
I had to whittle it down so much. I had to whittle it down a lot. Like, wow, I don't know what I was thinking I was going to try to put all this in there. But yeah, man, there was like 7 pillars of magic, and each pillar had like 2 different kinds of magic underneath it. And so it was just like, it was a lot. Like I had like, yeah, there was so much going on. And I was like, I don't know how the hell I thought I was going to fit this in like 200 pages. But yeah, so it definitely did not start off as 3. It started off as more like 11. And there was like 11 classifications of people. And then and yeah, I just had to like, there was just no way. And Dave was polite about it. He was very much like, you have a lot of cool ideas, and I really like them, but we have got to be able to make this fit into like a novella. So yeah, it was quite a bit.
I love that. Will?
that makes me think, did you have to whittle it down because it was a novella? Could you have added more if it was a novel?
Oh hell yeah! If it was a novel, I definitely would have like kept a lot of more of it. Because so the novel I'm working on now is not like that. It's not as many like different types as like the earlier drafts Necessary Chaos, but I'm definitely able to fit a lot more different things in it. So yeah, I think if this had been a novel, I definitely could have probably fit in a few more of these ideas. I probably still would have needed to whittle it down some, unless I was trying to put out like a Robert Jordan tome, which that's not as feasible in publishing nowadays. So unless I decide to self pub, but yeah. So I think the consideration of the novella and just trying to make sure I got everything else into it that needed to get into it required some of these magic systems to be tucked away.
I got more follow-up questions. Marshall?
Well, I was going to say, if it's not a Robert Jordan tome, and like the big epic fantasies can kind of get away with this, right? The Brandon Sandersons of the world, or whatever you want to say. But I guess what I'm curious is, if we've talked in the past about continuing in this world, do you think there's a way? Did you leave yourself an opening to bring in some of those other pillars and stuff like that if you were to continue this, right?
Absolutely. I definitely did. So yeah. I absolutely did. And I mean, I can tell y'all it won't be a spoiler, but the fact that like they were trying to tap into other dimensions was my opening to bring in other types of magic if I so chose to. So that was like, my little like, oh, well, if I come back, I could, if I want to, I could, flavor it up some and add some more, and so yeah, I definitely left a back door, and that's just kind of me in general. I'm always leaving like I feel like I like leaving back doors to introduce more things, or at least always putting a hint out there that there is more, and like there's other things out there. So yeah, so it could definitely happen. I definitely did not discard the notes. Like all of those notes are like in my salvage document. So like I could always go back to it later if I need to. But yeah, there's definitely inroads for it.
Oh, I like that, because we know one of the biggest feedback that you've received is everyone wants it longer. They want more of it.
Yeah.
So you've got the room there. I think it's super fascinating kind of just how you tied everything together. One thing I want to ask you about too is if let's say like let's look at Sanderson, all these epic fantasy guys, and a lot of fantasy in general that I've seen is, I think Harry Potter is one that really does this in the beginning here. I know, roll your eyes, but it's a good example, unfortunately. Introducing people to the magic by using a character who is being exposed to it for the first time. That's something that is a traditional trope in fantasies. You, however, don't do that. You kind of jump right in there. What was your decision into doing that? And, what was the thought process behind how you were going to introduce your audience to this magic system?
So for me, and I'm not going to say I would never ever use that trope and it doesn't ever have its place. I think it certainly does, and it is a useful tool on some fronts. But I also feel like sometimes it can feel a little bit, I don't know, it can feel a little bit like it caters to a certain kind of gaze, where it's like the story is always about this wide-eyed outsider who comes into this culture that they don't understand anything about, and they get all this stuff fed to them. And I'm like, sometimes I'm like, no, I want to be right there in the culture. I want to be right there in the mix of it, in the heart of it, where these things that like that for me, may not feel like my typical everyday. Is just like, oh well, you just got to roll with it, go with it, like figure it out along the way. So yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's a way to do the I don't know what this is, so explain it to me without it feeling a bit like the a regurgitation of the hero's journey, because that's what a lot of that feels like too. Just like, I don't know, like I have issues. The more I read of Joseph Campbell, the less I'm like enthralled with the hero's journey. So I don't know, like I definitely like don't aim to ever do that with my stories. I think mine's, even I'm thinking now even about the novel I'm like trying to revise. Even that's more like, we're just in it. You're in it. Like, figure it out. We'll catch you up on some stuff, but other stuff you're gonna have to like. It's not gonna be spoon fed to you. It'll all be laid out there, but like it'll be. I like to layer it more into the story, I guess.
Well,
my question is then, you talked about like, all right, we're already going to be in the culture. I think what's interesting about that is that even if you're already steeped in the culture, you're still trying to figure things out. Do you know what I mean? Like it still can present a way for you to create newness and to still have fresh eyes, because, with art, you could be surrounded by artists and you're still trying to find your way as an individualized human being and the way you're going to create art. And I feel like magic can work the same way, because all of these people use magic in a different way, versus where we have like that farm boy or that new person seeing magic, which does get tired. But I wonder how much of that stems from people writing from a perspective in society where they are the dominant culture. So it's like their version of trying to be like what it would be like for someone alien to come in differently. Does that make sense, what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, no, 100%. I mean, I think of like, I don't know. I think of like my recent trip to like Europe. Like when I can just imagine how obnoxious it must be when like Americans come over to some of these places and they're like, well, why do you do this? Why do you do that? What's that mean? Well, where's that at? Or where's this thing that I'm normally used to? And it's like, sometimes you just gotta like dive in and figure it out. Or like you do your research beforehand, or I don't know. I think like there's different ways to approach a character learning things in the story than them just being like doe-eyed, wide nose, like they just don't know anything about the world and it just all gets spoon-fed to them. I don't think that's how most people operate. I think people come in with people come to a place with their assumptions and their understanding of how things work. They don't come like blank slates. And I think that's usually my issue with a lot of those like POVs. When you have someone who doesn't know anything about the world, it's almost like they're coming in as a blank slate and they're just accepting all this new information without like any questions or any assumptions or any pushback or anything like that.
Yeah, you know what's I think too is, I think what's also interesting is, I'm going to use Leigh Bardugo's Shadow and Bone, the first book, where the main character Alina and Mal, Alina is discovered to be a Grisha, which she never knew. And what I found interesting about that hero's journey is that she was already steeped into it. She already knew all about the Grisha, but this was her first time of actually experiencing power that she didn't understand. So I felt like that was an interesting juxtaposition. You're not having someone suddenly, oh, I'm in this world. I also think there's a radical difference in telling those stories now, right? Like trying to go away from the hero's journey versus, say, when Star Wars came out, right? Now I feel like those type of stories will most likely work better or be a little bit more profound if it's middle grade or young adult. Because those kids are constantly, when you're a kid, you're constantly experiencing the world for the first time. As an adult, I think it is much more interesting to start in the world automatically.
Yeah, and I think like there's so many different ways to give information, like, because I think that's ultimately why people sometimes fall back on that, is because they're not sure how else to disseminate information about this world that they're creating. And like what's different or what's new about it. But I think sometimes when you have people who, I don't know, I'm just going to throw a random example out there. There's a society that uses telekinesis to do all their construction, but you have somebody who comes from a society where like it's like a sacred duty to lift things with your hands. They're going to come to all these telekinetics. I'm like, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you not using your hands to lift things? Like, you're all heretics. Like, that's a good way to deliver information. Like, it's like you kind of like, I think like people, there's in conversation you can reveal a lot of information. What startles somebody about something, or what feels familiar about something, or what feels like completely alien. Like, just having characters react, I think, can tell you just as much as having someone who's just like arriving like a blank slate and just getting all this information dumped on them.
Back to you, Nick.
Thank you, Channel 5. No, I liked how you did that, Brent. That's something that I want to compliment you on, is you really put us into the world and let us feel like we're living. We're getting used to the magic system as the people are already there, with that one. Now, consequences. This might be my favorite subject when it comes to magic systems. Give us a peek into what the consequences are of using magic in your world.
Well, so like, for instance, with Two Voice, eventually using it will cause you to not be able to speak at all. Like, you lose all ability to speak. And so that's one with the consequence. With the Black Nails, I'm trying to remember, but I feel like with the Black Nails, like, they eventually they get consumed by their own these diseases and things, that these poisons that they create end up consuming their own flesh and body, and they just kind of end up being like, they just end up dying from it. And if I'm going by memory here, but I feel like with the pale skins, I think they end up becoming like just ravenous animals, and they have no sense of control. They lose all personhood. They're just like uncontrollable beasts. So, and so I wanted it to be kind of like a consequence of where each source of power came from. So like, Two Voice came from this dimension that's just literally just completely full of, like, they don't have, the sound is nothing but screams. Like, screams is all you hear. Like, that's basically what happens in this world. I was kind of thinking like overuse of voice. So, you end up becoming a mute, or, people who work with I think of like a lot of like early healers who worked with like infectious diseases, and the risk that they would have to run sometimes of catching those diseases themselves. And then, I thought about people constantly used for war and how they get dehumanized and they become seen as less than human. So I was like, well, let's make that a literal thing here. And so I really didn't get to show those consequences in the novella. They were more like talked about. Like, I don't think you ever actually got to see them in full effect. So I think if I was to, that would be something I would do in any kind of potential sequel or prequel. If I have an idea for one of those, you would maybe see some of those consequences.
Okay, now I know enough of your writing to know that consequences in magic always have like a deeper connection to current society. And speaking to that, can you talk about your magic system and what roles or current societal issues played into that?
Yeah, so the three dimensions kind of are, I think it was blight, war, and torture. So I was just thinking about, what things push forward, like what things have pushed forward an economic system that, has these powerful corporations in charge of so much. And, you just look at across the world, how many people have suffered and been tortured working in a capitalist system? How many people have died from preventable diseases in a capitalist system? How many people have been purposely exposed to disease in the capitalist system? And then, of course, war, obviously, wars for resources, wars for land, whatever, and so on and so forth. Like all these things have occurred in, in capitalist systems. So that was kind of like what I was thinking about. Like, I was extrapolating that when creating these different magic systems. I wanted each one to kind of be uh, like a dark, I guess, representation of negative consequence of having like unchecked capitalism. So yeah, that was my thinking with those three.
I had a feeling, and so I'm glad I asked you that question to kind of like dig into the roots of that one and things like that and get through it. Now I'm going to go to Marshall and Will. What is your favorite part of the magic system that Brent built?
Me or you first?
Go ahead, Marshall.
I don't know. For me, I think I just like the idea because I didn't really, I picked up on it, but I don't think I kind of understood the real, the code switching thing for me means a lot. I mean, for me, like, it's one of those things that we do and we're constantly doing. And in my life, I feel like I'm doing it 15 times a day. Like sometimes I'm talking to a student, I'm talking to a teacher, I'm talking to my wife, and then I get to talk to some random racist white dude in the Safeway. You know what I mean? It's like it's one of those things where it's a magic system that I feel like is rooted in, I don't know, every day, but it's got some just badass teeth behind it. So that's my favorite part.
I mean, I think the language of it all, actually, throughout the magic system. And, I feel like, too, I like the magic system because I really like the characters. You know how some people read something because they're like, oh, the magic system's amazing. That shit turns me off. I can't like a story. It does. I can't like a story because the magic system is so fucking great. All right, like, okay. I've read books where the magic system was cool, but the characters are flat and boring. And I think the way that both of the characters in Unnecessary Chaos, the way the magic works, I feel like also enriches them and also tells a lot about them and the society that they're in. And that to me is the most interesting.
I would add too, like the implications to like the amount of ways you can solve problems too. Like there's the scene towards the end where they I can't remember, one of them's talking over the walkie-talkie and says something and fucks a bunch of people up. You know what I mean? It's just like puts everybody to sleep or something. And it's just like, that's one way it could do, but like you could do all kinds of other things too. And like, that was kind of, I feel like the nice way to two voice them. I don't know. It feels like there's, like you said earlier, there's an expansiveness to it. And I know there's other ways and other cool, other things that can happen, but we just got to see this one,
now I'm going to ask a question, Nick.
No,
Brent,
I'm not passing the mic to you.
Well, tough. You're going to sit down. Watch your game. Brent, was it hard for you to take away some of that world building and to simplify it, the magic? Yeah, tell me about that.
It wasn't, just because like I think I've come to understand, I think that is just my process when I write anything, is that like I write it with a whole bunch of ideas and things in it, and then I know I have to end up paring it down later. I'm going through that now as I'm like taking notes on the novel. I'm like, okay, I got to combine these two things. I really don't need that thing. Like, this can go away. I think my process is that I just kind of vomit a lot of ideas out in a story draft, and then I have to just prune it later. And the reason I also realize this is my process is because I tried to write something purposely doing the opposite thing, and I was so bored by like 5,000 words. I was like, I can't keep going. So I think it's just a natural part of my process that I throw a lot out there in the first draft and then shape it up later.
Mm-hmm. So my next question is, do you think magic has to have consequences to the user?
No, I think you have to do what works for the story, right? In my case, I wanted there to be consequences because I wanted to show that, that the ruthlessness kind of under it all, that these people were willing to take a resource from fucking hell dimensions, basically, because it was like, oh, this is a resource that we can use, and we might gain an advantage over the other. Like, I wanted there to be a consequence to that, and I wanted to kind of show like that the ruthlessness of each of these different like empires, and how much they were willing to do to one up the other, regardless of what it did to their own citizens and people. So I wanted there to be consequences with that, because I think otherwise the thematic messaging probably would have not succeeded. I think if I had like made it without consequences, but I don't think every story needs them. Like, I don't think Gandalf needed a consequence for using his magic. Like, that's not his purpose in the story. Like, he's that, I don't think yeah, and I don't know if this is in Sanderson's laws of magic or whatever, where he calls for consequences. I don't remember those laws, all of them, but I don't think I think you need to do whatever works for the story. Whatever, like, I think whatever, like, and also too, like, I mean, sometimes you may have multiple systems in a story where one has consequences and one doesn't, or, like, it just depends on what you're writing. So ultimately, I think you got to do whatever works for the story.
Nick, back to you.
So I actually want to answer the question about my favorite part of your magic system, and it goes back to one of your words that you use, expansive, and kind of tying to what Marshall said. Two voice can be used for anything, like as and I'm going to tap into this, and will chew me out later for it. But as like a former military person, like, I absolutely love two voice and like the big world consequences of it, not just an individual consequence. Like, you have some ramifications on world ending consequences there, which I really, really, really enjoy when you up the stakes like that without even really trying. You're letting the reader like kind of create the stakes on their own when they start figuring out like everything that it could be used for, which is great. I want to know though, what did you have any outside like reading movies or shows, comics or anything like that influence this type of magic world or magic building, if you will? Because I know you're a big comic person.
Yeah. So yeah, like, honestly, so the extra dimensional source of the powers that comes straight from like Cyclops and Nightcrawler. So yeah, like they get their powers from other dimensions, and those dimensions happen to actually have living things in them. Like, I think in Nightcrawler's dimension they have those little demons in them, and I think Cyclops' dimension had something in it. I can't remember what, but all right, or even like something like Juggernaut's gem that gives him his powers actually comes from a magical dimension when it has its own guardian and everything. So yeah, so I definitely drew on that a little bit of that comic book tradition when I was thinking about where the power was actually sourced. Let's see what else. I think with the Pale Skins, there was a little bit of Shadowcat in there with them and how they kind of like operated and moved. So yeah. So there's definitely a good bit of comic book influence in it, I would say. If some of the other magic systems had remained, I would have been able to say like Buffy and like Wrinkle of Time, but those didn't survive the chopping block. So
At least for now.
oh yeah, no, they're definitely in the salvage draft. So if I ever decide to pull anything out, or I use them in another project, yeah, you never know.
Oh, I love it. I'm actually going to turn to Marshall and Will again. What questions do you guys have?
Did you think about the magic system as queerness? as how it's being used by queer characters.
With two voice, yes, and especially two voice, I would say so, which is actually kind of part of the climax and the solution where they figure out how to kind of like beat the demon a little bit. Is like our language constantly changes, it constantly evolves, we constantly come up with new ways to say things so no one else knows what we're talking about. And it's language is an ever changing model. Like I always get annoyed with people who are like particular about a certain type of accent or a certain way that people will say things. And there's someone who someone said this, and I'm not gonna quote it right, but it was basically like, if you understand the idea of what someone is saying, why the hell are you policing the way that they say it? You understood what they said, so why does it matter that they didn't say it in this grammatically correct sequence? Which grammatically correct is illusionary anyway, because that just changes from with whoever's the dominant voice in society. So I would, queer. I would say two voice definitely has it's definitely queer and it's definitely black in terms of like the way the language changes, and also the power that the language has, because you look how many people use like black queer ballroom culture words now, when those words were just they weren't used like that. Now they're like pretty much like commonplace. Like pretty much everyone knows what slay means now. Everybody knows what tea means. Like everybody knows like these words. So I think there's power in it too, and people are starting to like, I don't know, and I have thoughts about it, but there's definitely something to say about the way that like queer and black language kind of infiltrates the wider pop culture space and kind of like takes hold, because it is humorous, it is funny, it is cool, it is kind of hip. So so I think all of that was at play.
I mean, I think just the other day Nick learned about beating someone's face, and I just was like, you didn't know what that meant, and you sometimes forget because like one is a makeup artist,
cool and I fit in.
No, because as like a makeup artist and like doing the people that I've worked with and everything like that, is just like, yeah, her face was beat. And I will never forget, one of my friend's ex-boyfriends was like, wait a minute, because I had said, oh, I beat her face. And he was like, wait, you hit her? And I was like, no, her face was beat. Like we beat it with the brush. Like it looked great. There was makeup on there. And he died laughing. He was like, oh my God, that is hilarious. But also like he got it. He was like, that is such a cool way to think about like, makeup or art or anything. So I think that's really interesting. Go ahead, Marshall.
Marshall, go ahead.
I get Brent.
No,
what were you going to say?
You can finish your thought.
Well, I was just going to say it's also kind of interesting, like how that word now, like we were talking about it, and how that word actually comes from like, trans sex workers, and how they were having to find a way to talk about the abuse that they were experiencing in almost a gallows humor kind of way. And it's like, so that language too is like, it's, it helps empower us through difficult times. Like, like the whole thing about like, oh, they clocked me, like that was their way of saying like, oh, I think they know who I am, like they know I'm trans, or or just I don't know, just like we create these words as a way to talk about the hard things without other people knowing what we're talking about.
Yeah, for sure. Marshall.
Something that Will brought up earlier too about not having, was it Will that brought up not having consequences or needing consequences for a magic system, right? That's not necessarily, this is what got me onto this thought, but like as you approach your next project, if you have magic systems, do you like, because I know in one of my works, there's a system, like how important is the system? You know what I mean? Like sometimes, I don't know, like sometimes there's just magic, right? So like with your next projects, is there, if there's a system, did you approach it differently than you did with the necessary chaos? Is there anything behind it, or is there just magic?
Yeah, so there's definitely a system, but it is not as, I don't think it's nowhere near as extensive as necessary chaos. I think in my next project there's witches, and a witch has to pay a price to get her power, to get his or her power, because it's a gender neutral term in this world. But yeah, so yeah, you pay a price for whatever powers you get. And so there's a group in this novel. They should survive revisions. So I can talk about them. They're called the Sown Witches, and the reason is because when they gave up they gave up their ability to speak for their power, right? Kind of like almost a little bit like Necessary Chaos, but different. So they end up having to get this wire sewn through their like lips and mouth, and their mouths are shut. So now they can only speak through other people, and like they and it's pretty painful when they speak through someone else. So like they have these the hate men. So, so they have these guys like wrapped up like Hellraiser, kind of like chains and all, and they roll them around on like these platforms, and they speak through these guys or whatever. And, you know, for me at the time, when I created that, I wasn't specifically thinking like, oh, they got that way because it was a price they had to pay. I was like, oh, that just is like a really cool image, and it's kind of gross, and I wanted to roll with it. So I think with this one, more than anything, I did what was cool first, and then I built a system around what afterwards. So I just kind of like, oh, that's cool. That seems cool. Like I didn't want to create a system and then feel constrained by it the whole story. I was like, I'm just going to write it out first and do what feels cool, and then like maybe find some kind of thread of commonality. But I kind of like I was like, okay, if they just pay a price for their power and then they can get whatever power fits for the story, that's fine. It's like one little thing. But yeah, so this one's definitely a lot looser, I would say, in terms of like there's not really a specific 3 types of powers. Like the powers can be very varied, but they all just have to pay a price for it or something.
And I guess the follow-up question to that too is like, so what differently do you have to approach it differently as you present it to the reader then, right? Because sometimes readers, especially readers of fantasy, come to it like, well, how does it work? I don't understand how it works, right? So how do you, I guess there's some way you have to package it, right? Because
yeah.
You know, depending on the work and the system.
So for this project, I guess for me, the explanation is that, you know, so there's something akin to the Cancerverse. I don't know if everybody knows what the Cancerverse is, but in Marvel Comics, there was this event basically where they found a universe that death didn't exist anymore. And because death didn't exist, life just kept growing and growing and growing and growing until literally there was no space in this universe. Like it was just full of life. And eventually it had to pop like a pus bump almost, and it broke into other universes. So in this project I'm working on, there's this multiverse that's kind of like that, and they're drawing power from this multiverse. And my explanation for why all these different varied powers exist is because this place is so full of different kinds of life and energies and whatever that pulling from it, you could get whatever out of it. So that's kind of like one of the things happening in the background with this thing.
So then my question with that is, like, word count wise, when you think of like complex magic systems that way, just in that in general, do you think, okay, I'm going to need about 120 to 130,000 words to actually tell this?
So I think for me, at least, I've always been big on word economy too. So I'm trying to keep it at 100,000. We'll see what happens because the revisions are making me think I might be pushing this towards like the 110, 115 territory, but I don't know. We'll see. But yeah, I think it depends on like how much of the like, because like what I'm trying to approach it with this one is that like I'm not trying to show the full complexity in the first one. I'm trying to give a little hints here and there and have like kind of like three main points, I guess, of reference. But I do feel like if it's going to continue, it probably will need more and more words. So like, because I'm thinking like I think Jen Lyons, I think each one of her books got bigger and bigger because each book showed more and more of the world. Or someone like even like Max Gladstone, I think each one of his books got a little bigger in the craft sequence just because more of this world was being revealed. And I think to successfully juggle all of that, you do have to have some kind of increasing word count. I think Sanderson's running into that with his Way of Kings books. Like each one is
that fourth one was absurd. How long that book was.
I'm still working my way through the first one, but I've seen like these things on the bookshelf, and I'm like, Jesus, like each one is getting bigger and bigger. And I almost think it has to in some respect because like you're adding more characters, you're adding more magic, you're explaining more. So as you open up the world, there's got to be more to say, right? Like it will almost be like you write your first book about the history of Virginia, right? And it's one size. And then you write your next book about the history of the East Coast. Well, if it's still the same size as the book about the history of Virginia, you're going to be missing a lot of shit. So you gotta go bigger. So I think, I think you don't really, I don't want to say you don't have a choice. So I'm sure there's people who've done it well and not really expanded, but at least for my money and what I tend to see on the bookshelves, I feel like if you're going to continue in the world and you keep expanding it, you kind of don't have a choice with word count getting bigger.
I mean, to give you an idea, we're talking 46 hours on the audiobook for, I think, the second book. And the third one was 57.
God dang.
Wow.
So, like, that's
like a week.
Yeah, it's so much time. That's why I listen to things really fast. But anyway, Will, sorry I cut you off.
No, it's okay. So what people do you read or have you read that inspired you to create magic systems? Like what authors can you say for our listeners or for anyone who just reads of like, these are the people that I love that you can really learn a lot from about how they build their magic?
Okay, so I would say Max Gladstone is by far one of my favorites. Max Gladstone, I would say P. Gilly Clark. I would say I'm gonna say Brandon Sanderson too. Like, I mean, I know there's a lot to critique with his stuff, obviously, but I do think the way he builds magic, there is a lot in it that's interesting, and there's stuff to learn from it. I would also say, I'm trying to think. I had another one in my head just now. I'm looking at my bookshelves as we're talking. But this isn't really like magic system, but I still think it's a system. I'm going to use Pierce Brown and how he does Red Rising and like how he breaks out those classifications of the different races. I wouldn't say it's not a magic system, obviously, but I still think it has the vibes of creating a system almost in some respects. Who else? Well, I love Nia's magic in Blood Trials. Like I thought that was really cool. Like how yeah, like when I talk about thematic, like that felt very thematic in terms of like that world and the story she was telling. Is there anyone else? Oh, David Anthony Durham's Acacia trilogy is like one of my favorites because the magic there is it's very simple, but it's very like profound in how it's handled. So yeah. Okay, I'll end there. Those are all my big ones.
Awesome. Nick?
Brent, as always, thank you for being part of the show and on the show and letting us ask you all these ridiculous questions. But we still got one more for you. Brent, what keeps you building magic systems?
Because they're fun and it lets me think of the impossible, and also it just lets me think of like, I don't know, like sometimes the world feels like there's no easy solutions to it, and there's nothing that like can fix some of these problems. And sometimes it's just fun to imagine like, oh hey, they got magic, problem solved. Like, you know, or like just imagining like, or just imagining new problems. I know that's kind of like, I don't know, that's kind of maybe a little twisted to think about, but it's like, you know what, this problem in real life really, really sucks. Let me write about these people dealing with this imaginary problem, and it kind of like takes my mind off the really terrible things. But yeah, like I think that's what keeps me going back to magic systems.
And this has been Just Keep Writing, a podcast for writers, by writers, to keep you writing. You can find us at justkeepwriting.org. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. Feel free to reach out to any of us on our social medias, and please jump in our Just Keep Writing Discord channel. Links to all of that is in the show notes. Lastly, please support our show by going to patreon.com/justkeepwriting. We offer daily writing prompts, early access to podcast episodes, and much more. Thanks for listening, and just keep writing.